Good morning, everyone. How are you feeling? I'm going to ask you please to turn off your cellular phones for the next 50 minutes so that we can communicate together about the Odyssey. You're going to listen to a little talk, and then you're going to have time to ask questions if there's anything wrong. So welcome here to this talk about the Odyssey Part 2, entitled Living in the Present. So you've all heard the many myths around Odysseus, and they are simply great, we must admit. Odysseus has left his island, Ithaca, with many other Greek warriors and besieged Troy for 10 years, until Athena, the daughter of Zeus, and Metis, the goddess of war and wisdom, protecting Odysseus, whispered to him the idea of the wooden horse, with its belly filled with men, introduced as a gift to the Trojans. This was in the Iliad. Now we have the Odyssey. Him and his 12 ships have been driven off course by storms for almost 3 years, where he has visited the lethargic lotus eaters, the Cyclops, the cannibalistic Lastrygons, the witch goddess Circe, and the edge of the western world where the dead live. After that, he was held captive by Calypso for 7 years, and once he was set free, he has faced the Sirens, the six-headed monster Scylla, and the whirlpool Charybdis, and finally returned home. But what do these myths mean? How to interpret these long travels and wanderings that kept Odysseus away from his loved ones and his home Ithaca for so long? Mythology is usually an explanation of the world we live in. Myths go back to the times of the gods and reveal the history of the universe, starting from chaos sometimes to reach the creation of the cosmos. But they also explain how heroes, semi-divines or human, have found their places amongst the gods. And here we have revealed the story of Odysseus, a very human character. Who's Odysseus? He's strong physically. That's what we've been told in the previous lecture. That's his first and most obvious quality. He's a bold warrior. Yet his second main attribute is his intelligence, his resourcefulness. And I quote from many passages we see, he's the man of many ways, always scheming, never wary of tricks, forever using to his advantage the mind that was in him. And these qualities make him different from all the other heroes that ever existed before. Odysseus' final characteristic is his will for home, which makes him able to endure all the hardships on his way. His efforts to reach his loved ones are now bolstered by important moral virtues, such as patience, restraint, and faithfulness. He shares most of these qualities with his wife Penelope and his son Telemachus, and the men and women of his times regarded them as important. The return of Odysseus towards his home is called a nostos in Greek. It's a homecoming or a homeward journey. We'll see different themes in them, how his quest unfolds basically regarding fate and free will, heroism and the coming of age of Telemachus, truth and disguise, and finally chaos and order. Before we conclude, you've been told that not all the warriors who have fought in Troy succeeded in their nostos, their homecoming. Indeed, Menelaus, who on his way back from Troy went in another direction from Odysseus and his men, traveled 8 years before reaching his home with Helen. Agamemnon, the commander of the expedition, returns home only to find his wife Clytemnestra with her lover Aegisthus ready to murder him. Achilles died in combat. Will Odysseus be luckier? On many occasions, Odysseus was tempted to forget about his home and his loved ones. So many times Poseidon, the god of the seas and father of the Cyclops Polyphemus, who was angered by Odysseus' arrogance, has unleashed tempests while the boats were so close to the promised land. His travels have lasted for so long that we may wonder, will he ever reach his destination? Or will he free himself from all bonds? All these questions will come clear at the conclusions of this great literary work. Perhaps I do not need to remind you about Homer, who he is, But I'd like to bring your attention on a few points concerning his existence and the times he lived in. Homer, we believe, was a blind poet and performer from Smyrna or Chios, because we heard a blind singer existed there. He must have lived around the age of 9th century BC. It was the beginning of literacy in the Greek world. The Greek borrowed the 25 letters of the alphabet of the Phoenicians and adapted it, adding vowels, thus creating a very important system. But it was also a period of great renewal. The population was increasing, just as well as economic exchanges. The political unions of the small kingdoms of Greek were more frequent, and so was cultivation of land. The age of separation of divine and secular powers had already begun, and the Athenian glory that would be remembered forever was already in preparation. It was also the times of the first Olympic Games, and Homer wrote the Iliad first, and then the Odyssey, two great works which might seem inseparable, even though their composition is separated by several years. On one hand, you have the Iliad, which concentrates on the men of Greek times, the great warriors of the Trojan War, war and peace, anger and friendship, insult and honors, are eternal questions for them. And on the other hand, you have the Odyssey, which concentrates on both men and women, and the intricate relationships between them. Governed by the prudent Athena, Odysseus is able to pass through the many obstacles that the god Poseidon puts on his way home to his loved ones. It is a love story then, but also a story of patience, reward, travels, and wisdom. Both the Iliad and the Odyssey are great works, yet the Odyssey, which we've started reading and will keep on reading now, is perhaps even more interesting than the Iliad. It is something very strange for the historical context, a radical departure from traditional narrative constructions. Homer has gone further than all the bards and singers and poets of his time. Instead of telling the story chronologically first, he allows many flashbacks and some projections into the future. Then he unites many poetical traditions. You have epic poetry, but also love poetry somehow, wisdom, and myths and tales from the folklore of different areas of Greece, which Homer probably visited before he became blind. He will depict a marvelous world, outside the boundaries known to man. He will invent a tale about a man, a hero who is not a semi-god, and who yearns for a simple life on the rugged soil of his island Ithaca, surrounded by his loved ones and far from the gods. According to one of his biographers, Judée de Lacombe, Homer is already singing of the necessity of change in mentalities of the antiquity. The beginning of the Greek civilization that appears with the Odyssey is also the end of the ages of gods and heroes. It will lead to the study of history, philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and much more in the years to come, and to a new understanding of human existence. The story, I will read quickly also, simply to situate the part we're going to discuss. Scholars usually divide the Odyssey into 4 parts: the Telemachy and adventures of Telemachus, where the story starts in the 20th years of absence of Odysseus. Athena herself descends on earth, on Ithaca, to find Telemachus, Odysseus' son, and she explains, she hears him explain how during Odysseus' absence, his wife Penelope has been using all her tricks to postpone her decision about remarrying, yet the young suitors are draining their resources and plotting against Telemachus. Athena convinces him to go look for his father. We move to part 2, the homecoming of Odysseus. Meanwhile, Odysseus appears to be captive of the nymph goddess Calypso, but now the gods have sent their messengers, Argeiphontes, to her, and they demand that she sets Odysseus free immediately. He can finally board on his ships again. And this time, the storms take him to the island of the Phaeacians, where he is welcomed in King Alcinous' home. Third part is the great wanderings. To entertain his host, Odysseus starts to tell the story of all his voyages, and he charms everyone with his adventures. He's a great storyteller. And finally, Odysseus in Ithaca
where King Alcinous fills a boat with gifts for him and sends Odysseus back home to his wife and son Telemachus. Once in his homeland, he makes himself known, and with the help of his men and Telemachus, who has returned, he attacks the suitors, destroys them, and is reunited to his loved ones. The Odyssey is thus cautiously woven like a thread, taking the reader into countless adventures. The part entitled Odysseus in Ithaca actually takes up half the tale and unfolds in 12 different books. This is the part we're going to talk about. It abandons the sorcerers, the witches, the monsters that we've seen in the first part and concentrates mainly on the characters from the palace of Odysseus. Odysseus himself, Penelope, Telemachus, but also the swineherd Emmaus, the nanny Euryclea, as well as a few other servants, Odysseus' father Laertes, briefly in the end, but also, finally, the 108 suitors, as numbered in Book 16, led by Antinous. They are Odysseus' rivals who have come from neighboring islands to court Penelope. And then all of their fathers, led by Euphetes, Antinous' father, who will be coming to avenge them in Book 24, while the population of Ithaca will join up against them, and Odysseus will be king again. I'd also like to go back on a key passages of Part 1 to explain how they will be resolved in Part 2. In Book 1, the narrator first had offered a macroscopic view, a view from heavens on the lives of humans and human adventures. Zeus himself, god of gods, maintaining justice and order in the cosmos, and Athena had been discussing about our hero in Mount Olympus, where the gods of the Greek live. He must be really important, this Odysseus, since the gods are talking about them. The story that will unfold involves a transformation of Odysseus from a bold warrior to a wise man, from a pirate, sacker of cities, as he is called sometimes, living from raiding and plunder, as it was custom, as seen in the beginning of the wanderings in the land of the Ciconians, for example, to a fair ruler, loved by his people and his family. How did this happen? When Odysseus first appeared, in Book 5, he was tormented and lamenting over his fate. Here's a quote. "So spoke powerful Argeiphontis, and there he left her, while she, the queenly nymph, when she had been given the message from Zeus, set out searching after great-hearted Odysseus and found him sitting on the seashore. And his eyes were never wiped dry of tears, and the sweet lifetime was draining out of him, and he wept for a way home, since the nymph was no longer pleasing to him." Why does Odysseus have to leave the paradisiacal island of the nymph goddess Calypso? It's a beautiful island full of fruit trees and flowers and water. The nymph is promising him eternal life, and on top of that, eternal youth and beauty for his love. But he sits there extremely sad, teary-eyed on the shore, weeping all day. Moreover, Calypso has held him captive for so long. It's been 7 years that he's been with her, like her toy almost. Why does she let him go now? Wonder? Maybe because Odysseus in this passage is finally able to choose an earthly happiness over all the godly gifts of Calypso, immortality, beauty, and youth. And so the gods team up in heaven to work on his homecoming, I quote, and see that he returns. And we can go back to Odysseus' departure from Troy as he tells his story to King Alcinous and the Phaeacian people. The stories unfold from Book 9 to 12, and in the kingdom of Alcinous, Odysseus is in a magical world of peace, with Nausicaa, the princess, washing on the shore the laundry, and then he arrives and he hears the blind poet Demodocus singing of the battles in Troy. And the poetry he delivers is so pure and authentic that Odysseus sheds another tear. And he is forced to reveal his identity. His old host asks him, "What's the matter? Tell us your story." And he begins the story of his wanderings. And we realize that during these wanderings, he has faced temptations of strength, like when he was held captive by the Cyclops Polyphemus in an episode you've probably read, or you will soon. And although these trials required physical strength and courage, there was also a poetical wisdom about them. Why was Odysseus punished for blinding the son of Polyphemus? He did it only to save himself and rescue momentarily his companions, and he did it all out of his cunning wisdom, his protection, and Zeus himself will intervene for him, reminding us that there is a form of justice which must prevail in the universe of the Greeks. He has faced also temptations of desire, like the sirens, whose chant can make any man forget who he is and where he is going. As Odysseus passes by them tied to a mast, we wonder, is this a perfect song already, godly to hear and authentic? But the sirens, they sing amongst the decomposed leftovers of the sailors who previously listened to them. They are related to death. It is not like the poetry of the bards and of Homer himself, so they cannot be the end of Homer's quest. If you think about it, the magical island of Calypso was too inhuman. The uncivilized world of the Cyclops could not satisfy Odysseus because it was too disordered. The chant of the sirens was too morbid. All the other words along his way had defects. Scheria, the land of the Phaeacians, perhaps had charm. Yet it will disappear as Odysseus leaves. A rock will cover it and will be thrown against it, as if it was not meant to be. Odysseus, guided by his mind, his metis, his skills, his virtues, his will for home, has faced all these temptations, and now he gets back on his island only to encounter another set of challenges. He still has to make himself known to his loved ones and reclaim his throne. Only then and there will he be happy. Only then and there will he stop longing or looking forward or looking back at his heroic past, and he will start turning to the present. This decision to live in the present is the beginning of his quest. In Ithaca, Odysseus is finally back where he belongs. We may wonder if he chose his own path or if it was imposed on him by the gods. And Book 13 starts with a confrontation between Odysseus and Athena. The scholars Détienne and Vernin point out that in this scene of Book 13, when Odysseus, without knowing, has finally reached the coast of Ithaca, Athena appears in front of him taking many shapes. And in order not to show that he is lost and to betray himself, Odysseus lies, invents smart answers to her. She replies, "It would be a sharp one and a stealthy one who would ever get past you in any contriving, even if it were a god against you. And yet, you never recognized Pallas Athena. Is she teasing him? Always you are the same, and such is the mind within you, and so I cannot abandon you when you are unhappy, because you are fluent and reason closely, and keep your head always. Anyone else come home from wandering would have run happily off to see his children and his wife within his halls." In this particular confrontation, Athena and Odysseus are like partners in crime. There is no domination in this relationship. She is endlessly transforming from one shape to another, and he is perpetually inventing stories. Thus, she will even transform him in the end, so that he can enter his island unrecognizable and accomplish his plans. Odysseus was perhaps punished for his recklessness by the wrath of Poseidon, but he has managed to prove again that he is worthy of the trust of Athena and Zeus himself. Every twist in this plot has been meticulously orchestrated. The revelations can now unfold in Ithaca, so that Odysseus can reclaim his identity and his throne. Once he gets back, he's not a nobody anymore, as he claimed once when the Cyclops asked him. He has earned the honors at war and deserved the recognition of his pair. Telemachus, on the other hand, is still young. He has never seen his father before. He belongs to the new generation. And like all the other young suitors there, he has not been in Troy. He has not done anything glorious. But he has grown up listening to the stories of the heroes sung by the bards everywhere, of the glorious warriors who fought for honor and vengeance in Troy. Now Telemachus is the first one to learn about Odysseus' real identity. And yet, since it involves a transformation by Athena from a beggar to a handsome man, he is confused. Is it a god facing him? Odysseus has to assure him that he's not a god. He's simply human, he's learned that. And seeing how his son insists, he even scolds him a little in a fatherly way. Telemachus, it does not become you to wonder too much at your own father when he is here, nor doubt him. No other Odysseus than I will ever come back to you. But here I am, and I am as you see me. And after hardships and suffering, much I have come in the 20th years, back to my own country. If we go back to previous episodes, during the Great Wanderings, the recognition Odysseus' god was mostly due to his physical strength and appearance. In the land of the dead, for example, Odysseus saw the ghost of his mother Anticlea before knowing that she had passed away, and she came to him. He was also recognized by the ghosts of King Agamemnon and the warrior Achilles, his companions in Troy, both regretting the double-edged sword of glory and honor that led them to die at war. While Odysseus is still alive and on his way home, he realized that honors human give cannot replace happiness. And now that Odysseus is back on Ithaca, plenty of time has passed. We ask ourselves, is he still the same man? He's definitely looking for something more meaningful than war and vengeance. He has longed for so many years to find a way home to his loved ones. He wishes to live a simple life on his island, away from trouble, away from the gods even. And perhaps he can transmit this wisdom to Telemachus, his son. Certainly, the epic poetry of Homer speaks of a glorious past. Yet Homer changes the history of Agamemnon, Menelaus, Achilles, and Odysseus to show us a lesson more valuable than heroism at war. Telemachus is won on Odysseus' side immediately, and Odysseus exits the house of Emmaus, the swineherd, to head for the palace. At the doors, he sees his old dog, Argos, and the dog wags its tail in front of him, but it's too feeble to even get up. Odysseus proceeds to enter the great hall where all the suitors are wasting their days away. The most important scene is perhaps when he faces Penelope after so many years. Seeing him for the first time disguised as a beggar, she says to him, I waste away at the inward heart, longing for Odysseus. These men try to hasten my marriage. I weave my own wiles. We may wonder, did she recognize him at that instant? And what are all these suitors still doing in her palace? Has Penelope waited really for him? Weaving also is strange, a work of creation and bringing to life. The image of Penelope weaving her wiles and unweaving at night every point she did during the day is forever inscribed in our minds. Perhaps it points out that what the suitors admire Penelope for, what they want in her, is perhaps her likeness to Odysseus himself. They are both weaving a design, inviting us to a magical universe. They play with the truth to entice us, like Homer does, disguising his wisdom into poetical verse to seduce his readers. Odysseus, disguised as a stranger, is able to weave his wife as Penelope does. He proceeds to tell his own tale, fully invented, of course, and he holds Penelope spellbound. As she listened, her tears ran and her body was melted, as the snow melts along the high places of the mountains, when the west wind has piled it there, but the south wind melts it. And as it melts, the rivers run full flood. Odysseus and Penelope are heroes. Their actions have no match in the Greek word. Are they knowingly testing each other? They are both telling tales where truth and lie are magically intertwined, in order perhaps to save themselves. Or maybe because if they told the truth, it would be too incredible. Penelope does not yield, yet she sends the stranger to get a bathing with her nanny. The next recognition is when Ericlea, the nanny, recognizes his car as she is asked to bathe Odysseus' feet, but he forces her to keep silent. Then comes the bow contest between the suitors. The winner will marry Penelope. But Odysseus is amongst the suitors disguised as a beggar, just before the climax of the scene when he had to shoot with a bow. Odysseus puts Emmaus and the shepherds Philoitos on his side. After killing Antinous, his main rival, he told the other suitors who he is. "You dogs, you never thought that I would any more come back from the land of Troy," he says. Odysseus and his men have trapped the suitors, and now they drop one after another. Ironically, Odysseus spares the bard, Phemios, who was singing to charm the suitors about the sad homecomings of the warriors of Troy and the herald of the palace. But he then proceeds to cleanse the palace from all the traitors. A little later in Book 21, Penelope is still refusing to recognize Odysseus, even as he won the bow contest that she organized, knowing that only him could string the bow. Has she given up? It is only at the last moment that Penelope seeks the strength and wisdom to test him again and asks him a final trick question relating to their wedding bed. She asks the maid and nanny Euryclea to move the bed to another chamber. Yet Odysseus knows that his bed cannot be moved because it was made into a live olive tree. And so he gets angry and says, "What happened to my bed?" And so he spoke, and her knees and heart within her went slack as she recognized the clear proofs that Odysseus had given. But then she burst into tears and ran straight to him, throwing her arms around the neck of Odysseus and kissed his head. With these tears, we know that Odysseus has reached his home, the place where he can be in the here and now, with no remorse, no regrets, no hope for anything better in the future than his island. Finally, he is a much wiser man. He has seen through the universe's perfection and understood its mechanism. He has felt and tested the faithfulness of his loved one and recognized his place is with them, and vice versa. In Book 23, Odysseus and Penelope go to bed, this same bed that served as a test. And now dawn of the rosy fingers would have dawned on their weeping, had not gray-eyed goddess Athena planned it otherwise. She held the night back at the outward edge. She detained dawn of the golden throne by the ocean and would not let her harness her fast-footed horses who bring the daylight to people, Lampos and Phaeton, the dawn's horses who carry her. Through their love, Odysseus and Penelope live a moment of eternity here on earth. The night is prolonged by Athena. This is almost the end of the story, yet there are still some loose ends, like what will happen once the people realize Odysseus and Telemachus have slaughtered the suitors during the bow contest. Odysseus therefore asks Telemachus to clear the blood and prepare a ceremony for his people, knowing that the fathers of the suitors will certainly come back to claim their revenge. Indeed, there is a final scene where the two clans are facing each other, and one man from Odysseus' clan kills Euphetes, the father of Antinous, leader of the other army. But the goddess Athena is there to force a reconciliation. Zeus himself intervenes to stop the combat. There will be no more bloodshed, and the people must learn to live together once more. These difficulties that Odysseus faces to get back on his throne and bring back unity on his island are a sign that the times Homer lived in were complex times. Kingship was a problem in Greece, way before tyrants started to appear, and democracy later on. Yet the voice of order had spoken since the beginning through Zeus and Athena's council. Its authority was delivered in one block, and its power must prevail. The cosmos must return to balance and beauty. The suitors, they have offended the gods by trying to seduce Penelope and abusing her hospitality. They all have to die. Hospitality is the law of Zeus, and it contributes in establishing alliances between men. Yet once again, where does the truth lie? The suitors' desires have never been accomplished, and their plans against Telemachus always failed. The intelligence of the episode is very important to understand this tale and the message behind mythology. Order which must be restored on Ithaca is complex and must always conciliate the contradictory forces of the universe. As the people of Ithaca are fighting bravely against the armies of the fathers of the suitor, Homer says, "And now they would have killed them all and given none of them homecoming, had not Athena, daughter of Zeus of the Aegis, cried out in a great voice and held back all the company." For comparison, consider the ending of the Epic of Gilgamesh. On one hand, Gilgamesh, having slain many giants and monsters and been to the end of the world, got back to Uruk because it was a convenient solution. Remember? Going back to the city he had left at the outset of the epic, where he is king, was presented as the best of two choices. Now Odysseus, on this hand, has witnessed a violent crisis, threatening the human order and the divine order. The war exploded in Troy. Chaos was everywhere on his island. He faced these problems with the will for home as a guide, even if the actions he had to undertake could only be settled from the present. When he finally reached his home, there was a sense of reward. Homer thus told the story of one particular man, Odysseus, a hero coming back from war with his companions, but he was not interested in the gods particularly, but rather in the unfolding of historical event, showing as he went along how the love and intelligence of the men and women of his times managed to get them out of a crisis. The Epic of Gilgamesh ends on magnificent funerary rites performed for the godlike hero Gilgamesh, whereas the prophecy that Tiresias uttered in the land of the dead about the last days of our hero is not accomplished in the end of the Odyssey. Remember, he had said, "Death will come to you from the sea in some altogether unwarlike way, and it will end you in the ebbing time of a sleek old age. Your people about you will be prosperous. All this is true that I tell you." The end of the Odyssey is a happy end. For Odysseus, Penelope, and all the people of Ithaca, the stories of all the people Odysseus met and all the cultures he saw have a universal meaning for us today and will always make us dream. If we consider the final lessons of his quest, for once, Odysseus has found his place in the cosmos, the ordered, just, and beautiful universe of the Greeks. Once all the elements of the cosmos aligned, he was able to make a safe return. He learned to live in the present moment and refused the immortality of the gods, as he refused youth and beauty of Calypso. He let go of his attachment to glory and wealth, knowing that his heroic actions at war will be nothing in the face of death, as he met Achilles and Agamemnon, for instance. And on his island, he even got a glimpse of the eternal, here on earth, through his love for Penelope. Love was mutual and everlasting, and he was able to live it, live every second of it, every moment of it. His home was there, where eternity existed. According to Luc Ferry, Plato and Aristotle in their philosophy will explain the same lessons as Homer in more rational conceptual language. Plato, for instance, will speak more thoroughly of truth and justice in the Greek cosmos. Thucydides and Sophocles, in the same way, will question history and the difficult times they were living. Aristotle will discuss happiness itself and more precisely the joys of contemplation. And with this first antiquity classic, we are learning how to live a good life amongst humans through a mythico-poetic experience, but the lessons we learn have a spiritual aspect that we can understand, in secular ways even today. And if we read carefully, we might very well hear something about our own position here on Earth in the 21st century. Thank you. Do you have any questions? And then you're free.